Is it the mustache? Who knows?
What's up YouTube? Lore spoiler season is continuing and the next batch of cards that we have been given come straight from Targon. And so far it's not 100% guaranteed which champion will follow them yet. But a good guess would surely be Pantheon, considering that these card arts do kinda look warrior-esque. And other people were theory crafting Yuumi, but this kind of support package at least doesn't really look very similar to Yuumi. Alright, before we look at the cards and can gauge the whole power level, we notice right away there's a new keyword and it's called Fated. And Riot also just released what exactly that keyword means. The first time each round an ally card targets me, grant me +1/+1. So that applies to cards like Guiding Touch and Pale Cascade, but of course also to cards like Brightsteel Protector, giving something buffs or barriers through other units. And keep in mind that we can also use this in some creative ways if we're desperate for the stats buff. For example, we're swinging in for lethal, but we're 1 damage off of lethal. We can then Fumes our own unit to push 1 additional Nexus damage. Not sure if those situations will come up a lot, but it definitely is a thing to keep in mind. So Fated overall looks like a solid keyword. It's a nice addition to a card that is already good. But of course it also does require some deck building cost and does require you to play some buff cards and so on. Of course, a deck like Taric, a champion like Taric is going to be super happy about it, but it won't really suit all types of Targon decks. Now let's get to it. Let's look at the cards. Saga Seeker, 1 mana, 1/2 Fated. Looks too bland, to be honest. Looks too vanilla, too low value. Will only be good once you actually put a couple of buffs on it. With gems, of course, this might be worth it in a very fast, aggressive deck, but I don't see a deck like that being good, so not too much to say about Saga Seeker. The next ones are quite interesting, though. We have Iula or Iula. 3 mana, 3/3, give an ally spell shield and overwhelm this round. Now this card is spicy. It's only very slightly understated, but has a situationally insane late game finishing effect. Putting something like that on a Aurelion Sol or on some other big dragon or some other card that already got buffed a lot with gems or something like a stacked Taric is going to be very useful. So the good thing is, so far Targon's only really effective finishers were big Celestial Invokes. Then with the buff to Dragon's Clutch, the dragons also became big Overwhelm finishers. And they don't necessarily need a card like Iula. I just call her Iula. But if we assume Pantheon and some of his support cards to be rather mid-rangey, well-statted, combat-oriented units, just like, for example, the Warrior, the Evoke Celestial card, then Iula could be just the right card to fill the slot of a flexible finishing card. By flexible, I mean that worst case scenario, you face an aggro deck, you don't have any other plays, but you need a blocker and you still play her for 3 mana, 3/3. It's not the best, but it's still solid. But of course, she really shines as an offensive finisher. And I actually kind of like the design of this card because it will be hard to play a huge unit and play Iula in the very same turn just because she costs 3 unit mana. So you do need to set up your win condition, and it also gives your opponent the chance to interact with it. The action goes back to them. They can maybe pop the spell shield and find a silence or a stun or a freeze minimorph, whatever. And since it doesn't grant spell shield overwhelm, that means you did effectively negate the attack. So I think it's a flexible and neat card. This is probably gonna increase in value once we see the whole Pantheon package. As of right now, there aren't too many cards in Targon decks that would really need this. It's only neat in combination with Taric and gems, but dragons already have their own finishers and big Celestials as well, of course. Moving on, Blinded Mystic. Now, sure, this one is gonna raise a lot of debate. 4 mana, 3/2, play grant an ally +1/+1 and silence an enemy follower. Silence an enemy follower. I'm sure that's going to be a hot topic of discussion. Now, whether or not this card sees play is going to be super meta dependent because it is very conditional. As a 4 mana 3/2, of course, it's terribly statted and overcost. Even if you already have an ally on board as a 4 mana 4/3, basically, it's still kinda mediocre, but being able to main deck a permanent silence effect on a follower could be absolutely huge in certain metas. For example, whenever the Leviathan sees a lot of play. His biggest nightmare, of course, is Equinox. So far, Equinox was not the most consistent card to generate because you needed to find it in the Celestial pool first, but now you can main deck up to 3 copies of a follower silence, of a permanent follower silence. And that will definitely mess up a lot of combo strategies or slow mid-range strategies that try to put a lot of buffs on one unit. So anything that tries to give something overwhelm, any bigger backline engine, maybe this will be a common answer to something like Yordle Captain, because Targon will otherwise struggle to remove a 4/4 backline engine. So I don't know, this card is interesting. I don't think I personally like the design. I do think it does add interaction to the game, and given how situational and conditional it is, because you usually do want to play it with the buff, and that already requires you to have something on the board, you can't be too far behind and so on. The cost of including this in your deck and of playing it is fairly high, because it doesn't do much against most aggro decks. But just the pure existence of this card will basically negate a lot of strategies, a lot of combo strategies. And I feel like the card by design is pretty darn polarized and will polarize some matchups even more. Kind of a similar debate as to Minimorph and so on. I don't want to delve too deep into this, but that's all I can say for this card. Very situational and conditional. Can be insane, but can also see close to no play if the meta is full of aggro and there's nothing relevant to silence. Now moving on to what is easily the best card of this package, and easily one of the biggest power creep cards that I've seen in a long time. Wounded Whiteflame, 3 mana, 2/4, already an okay stat line. Not only having the Fury keyword, not only having the Fated keyword, the new one, but also the Dragon tag. So the synergies of this card are absolutely off the charts. Keep in mind the Dragon tag might be just about the most valuable tribal tag in Legends of Runeterra. Now that the dragons got buffed recently, a lot of cards like Herald of the Dragons, especially Dragon's Clutch for Overwhelm, as well as Ruined Dragon Guard and so on, Shyvana just in general, benefit greatly from having more viable dragons. Also, one of Dragon's bigger weaknesses was not having any consistent and good plays around turn 3. Now that has changed significantly with the addition of Ruined Dragon Guard, with the addition of Herald of the Dragons, and then playing your 4 mana dragons on turn 3. But now you have another way of filling that hole. Now I think this card would already be good if you would either leave one of the keywords out or the tribal, but with all 3 of those, this is just a super solid, well-statted unit in a region that really needed something like that to cover one of the weaknesses that region had, and that was having some sticky early game minions that also trade very well. And now the interesting thing is this can see play in a lot of different decks. You don't have to play this in dragons necessarily. This can easily be played in the Taric type of deck with some buffs, just making use of Fury and Fated. On the other hand though, you can definitely play this in dragons. You can target this card with cards like Single Combat, Concerted Strike to get the Fated buff, but also of course combat tricks. Now looking at this card, this definitely reminds me of when we first saw Merciless Hunter, or a card like Grizzled Ranger, when it was still a 4/1 and Loyal Badger Bear was a 4/4. Just very evident power creep, like purely too much value in stats and keywords and so on. That being said, the card of course is still fairly vanilla, so just including that card in your deck won't be incredibly broken on its own. It's not gonna win games by itself basically without having all of those synergies, without building your deck around it. So I will definitely say the card doesn't really look broken in a toxic or uninteractive way, but it is kind of broken in a somewhat straight up overpowered type of way. And now the last card in the package is that also makes me think that it's gonna go into the Pantheon way and probably be somewhat board-centric mid-rangey as we stand together. 3 mana burst speed spell, give 2 allies +1/+2 this round. Very effective combat trick. Somewhat reminiscent of Troll Chant, but of course different applications and slightly more expensive. But this card should generally be very, very good, especially considering if you pair that with Fated units, you might get another 1 or 2 +1/+1 effects. And also considering the synergies with other Targon cards like Taric, like maybe Mountain Scryer or Like basically in a region where it can be important to keep some back row engines alive, maybe even Zoe. But even just looking at the card on its own, like 3 mana for a total of 6 stats value is really, really strong for a combo trick. And at the same time, you have the opportunity to dictate or to even swing 2 trades with only 1 card that is fairly mana efficient. And that was the exact reason, or one of the reasons, why Troll Chant is as good as it is of a combo trick. So overall, a very interesting set of cards. I personally like that they're exploring the mid-range part of Targon a bit more, but like I can't really say a final verdict until we have the whole package, until we know which champion, probably Pantheon, is gonna be accompanying them, what kind of effects and interactions they have. As of right now, intuitively, I could definitely see Pantheon Taric be a thing. I could see Pantheon Dragons be a thing. But as always, I'll also be interested in hearing your guys' opinions about those. So final verdict on these cards. Saga Seeker probably won't see a lot of play, only if it should end up being a very tempo-oriented deck and more buff cards, more very effective buff cards are going to be implemented. Iula could be a good tech card. Right now, she wouldn't see much play. There's not much necessity for her, but could definitely shine once we see the rest of the cards. Blinded Mystic, very meta dependent, either super good or super bad. Wounded Whiteflame, just way above average solid is the best way to describe it. And We Stand Together, also definitely very solid. Again, it depends on how good mid-range Targon is going to be in general. If it will be a solid archetype, then We Stand Together can definitely see a lot of play. And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe if I completely misjudged which champion is going to be revealed. And maybe what you think they might look like.